Mouth breather. While my ice cream gradually melts, I am going to talk to you about what I thought up when I turned on the TV looking for something to watch while I ate my ice cream and randomly caught a little snippet of a movie on the Comet Network that was some sort of knockoff of the movie Gladiator that I had never heard of. I have heard of Gladiator, of course, most of you have. So this was some other Roman gladiator type movie, and it starred somebody who looked like Ben Affleck, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't actually Ben Affleck. And I may look it up later out of idle curiosity, but it got me thinking about I've had a thing in my life for a long time where I in idle moments I will think about comparative ethics. To use D&D terminology, I am most often thinking about law versus chaos, because to me that's the one that requires the more elucidation. My understanding of good and evil is largely an intuitive thing. I don't think I'm terribly unusual in that. Most people kind of define good in terms of what's good for them, and evil in terms of what's not good for them, to a finite extent. Most people aren't sociopathic enough to just stop there and accept that those are the be-all and end-alls of the subject. But I spend a lot of time talking about law and chaos, and I will make a video discussing those at some length. I've already touched a little bit on it. I could definitely fill a video talking about my philosophy of chaos and why I think it's a good thing in various details and iterations, but that is not what the Gladiator knockoff movie got me thinking about. What I got there is the idea that, as I said, ethics, we've kind of defined our understanding of right and wrong in various ways, heavily influenced by religions, but also coming from various political systems down through the past and in the, whether it's the distant past or the recent past, most of our understanding of that is shaped by history. And I think you could make a fairly broad and fairly accurate, a broad but fairly accurate generalization could say that most of the good stuff in our ethical system has come down to us from the Greeks, and most of the bad stuff has come down to us from the Romans. It's not all bad, obviously, but there are a lot of parallels. The Greeks had their assholes. The Spartans are the best known example of those, whereas the Athenians are the best known examples of what we think of as the good Greeks, but the actual Athenians themselves would have had bad people among them, and not all of their social institutions were for the good, but a lot of the ones that we really like and that we feel cause good in our lives today, those come from the Athenian tradition. Athens was one of the first democracies in the world. It was a democracy where slaves did not get to vote, so it was obviously imperfect because it still had slaves, and it did not take those people's opinions into account. It did not have women voting, which, in my opinion, that's a lot more ethically ambiguous than the slaves thing, but a lot of people would say it's not. So, whatever, we'll leave that alone for now. I'm not sure this recording a video while eating thing was at all a good idea. Here. Getting to see a little bit of how much of a slob I am. Probably not great. But anyway, my important thing was to get the point that I wanted to talk about discussed, and so, here we go. So the Greeks gave us some of our ideas regarding things like democracy, even if we innovated on the system in ways that we think of as being good, and they probably would not super disagree. They would think it was weird that we didn't have slaves, but they wouldn't think that we were evil because we didn't have slaves. As long as we didn't say they were evil for having slaves, then they would probably, agree to disagree. And ditto for the women issue, and ditto for all sorts of other things that we wouldn't have agreed with them on. The Romans came along later, and they the Romans, when I say that the Romans gave us a lot of our bad ideas, I'm not saying the Romans were evil exactly. They were not as assholish as the Spartans, so they have that going for them. They invented a concept of right and wrong that was very different from our concept of right and wrong, and a lot of people in the modern age still kind of cleave to some of those Roman ideals, especially since they got absorbed into Christianity after the Christians converted some of the Roman emperors. That was quite a coup for Christianity, but at the same time it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory because the early Christians had a lot of nice people among them, and then in order to stop the Roman Empire from constantly slaughtering them, they assimilated into the Roman Empire and kind of took it over from within. And in the process, they had to absorb a lot of Roman ideology that really did not jive with their own beliefs, but they were able to kind of bridge that gap and integrate in ways that they maybe shouldn't have. You see similar things happening with a lot of social justice movements today, where really nice people who think violence is a terrible thing that should never be done are willing to get in bed with the Antifa movement, who believes in extreme violence towards anyone that they don't like. And so you have this spectrum from the incredibly nice Quaker-like people who only want social justice for the best possible reasons and they never want violence, all the way to outright psychopaths hiding within the Antifa movement, who I think are probably a very vast minority. A lot of Antifa people are let's say, less than effective. But there are definite crazy bastards there who are congratulating themselves on having found a smokescreen that they can hide behind, where they get to engage all of their most psychopathic impulses against what everybody has agreed are acceptable targets, such as literal white supremacists. Though there are a few of those still out there. I'm certain they are not as common as people like that say they are, but they do exist, and they are the acceptable punching bags of all of society. I think that those people are not good people, and we should not support their ideas, but I don't believe anybody deserves to just get randomly punched in the street because of an idea they espoused. That's insane. That's going way too far. So, but anyway, yeah, definitely videos of me eating are not going to be a thing on this channel, for the most part. So this is a one-time experiment that has not succeeded. Anyway. There, that's that. So, alright, to quickly finish my point. This has been an experiment in seeing what it would be like if I left my camera stood up on its little stand here. It doesn't frame me very well, or doesn't get me in the frame very conveniently. So it's a good idea if I want to show off a shirt I'm wearing, but not so good of an idea if I'm not trying to, if my standard thing on this channel has been to just be very tightly focused on my face, and that does make my thumbnails all look kind of the same, which is a problem. But other than that, I don't really want to give people a reason to look at the video, because they're not going to see very much that they're going to like. The point is to listen to me, not to look at me. So, Romans. The reason why I say a lot of our evil ideas came from the Romans is because the Romans kind of invented the concept of, when we have the cliche that says business is business, a lot of that ideology comes down to us from a Roman origin. Now, one of the reasons why I stress that the Romans were not evil originally is that a lot of their ideas came from their ancestors called the Etruscans, and even earlier ancestors than that. The peninsula that we now call Italy had people living in it for a very long time, and at some formative point early in their history, the early Romans or Etruscans or whatever they called themselves at the time had massive famines and shortages of food caused heavily by insect plagues. And so when they were sort of importing the Greek gods to become what would later be the Roman gods, they're basically the same gods, worshipped in almost the same way with a few differences. One of the big differences is that Ares, the Greek god of war, was this kind of devil figure who the Greeks, very few Greeks actually worshipped Ares. Most of them thought of him as a figure to be warded away, make sacrifices to him so that he doesn't punish you. But very few people would actually intentionally seek him out and ask for a blessing the way they would with, say, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. If you were interested in starting a new romance, you would burn a cow or whatever to Aphrodite and ask for her blessing. You wouldn't really do that with Ares. Aphrodite became Venus in the Roman tradition, and from my understanding, almost nothing changed. The worship of Venus was basically the same as the worship of Aphrodite. All the myths were pretty much the same. There was almost no change. On the other hand, when Ares turned into Mars, and yes, for anyone who is not super knowledgeable, the planets Venus and Mars are named after the Roman gods Venus and Mars. I sincerely hope everybody already knew that, but just on the off chance that you didn't know, it's worth covering. Anyway, the worship of Ares, the not really worship of Ares turned into the very enthusiastic worship of Mars, because one of the first things that kind of changed as that changeover was happening was the Romans conceptualized Mars. So Mars was the god of war. The Romans conceptualized war very heavily in terms of not going to war against neighboring human states, although certainly they would do some of that, but they also thought of war as including the process of fighting against a plague of locusts eating your crops. So to the Romans, it became codified in their minds very early on that war was a way of keeping yourself from starving. And when you think of it that way, if you didn't have grocery stores, if you didn't have any ability to get your own food other than to grow it, and if people, animals, fungi, weather patterns, and so forth were constantly attacking your crops and destroying your crops and putting you in real danger of death by starvation, then you would think of war against those forces as a pretty good thing. So the Romans loved Mars. They loved the idea of going to war against everything that was going to stop them from feeding themselves. And so the people who were most effective at provisioning themselves with food were the first version of what the rich people were in that society. And so as the society became more and more successful at feeding itself and more civilized and more built up into institutions that could weather change and avoid collapsing into barbaric savagery and significant chances of death, the Romans really got super into that whole thing. So I've talked about the lawful evil versus lawful good thing. The Romans were super duper lawful. And as I may have mentioned in the earlier video where I talked about the concepts, I am of the opinion that law by its nature kind of drags good down into becoming evil. And chaos, conversely, kind of has the ability to pull evil up and turn it into good. It's not a strong current in either direction. There are a lot of lawful good people that never change, and there are chaotic evil people who never change. But in general, I believe that there is more of a movement in that direction than in the opposite direction. So the Romans loved law, and their inclinations were sort of evilish. And in this case, when I use the word evil in this context, I am very specifically defining it as a degree of selfishness which exceeds the norm and becomes callous to the cost to others of making yourself richer. So all of the things I believe about how rich people are privileged and kind of privilege blind, that's a little bit of social justice ideology that I do agree with. I am very inclined to condemn that from my admittedly biased perspective as a generationally poor person who legitimately does hate the rich. And I've said before, I will openly admit to being a little bit classist against the rich, but I think that the rich can afford to have a little bit of classism pointed at them because, unlike with all the other bigotries where the discrimination against white discrimination against blacks by whites, discrimination against women by men, all these other things that the social justice people propose, you can find a lot of evidence that seems to suggest that, but you can also find a lot of evidence that seems to suggest the opposite. Not so with classism. The evidence is extremely clear. Unless you are extremely biased on the subject and super far down the rabbit hole of Reaganomics type philosophy, almost everyone who looks at the evidence with an even vaguely critical eye will see that the rich have a massive advantage against the poor, even though the poor massively outnumber the rich, and various excuses or reasons are cooked up to explain why that's okay, but you have to be extremely far down the route of thinking that sort of thing is okay before you can look at that situation and go, there's nothing wrong with this, and anyone who thinks that there's anything wrong with this is obviously insane. Almost anyone, even if they personally endorse Reaganomics or whatever, they can understand why a poor person would look at Reaganomics and think, oh my god, this is horrible. So, of the various oppressions, I think classism has the most evidence to support it, to the point where evidence is almost unnecessary because the vast number of people can just look at it and will see it in a pretty accurate fashion, and the rich are in the position of having to cook up rather elaborate conspiracy theories like Reaganomics to explain why what they're doing is not a bad thing when it very obviously seems to be. So a lot of that ideology, I think, comes down to us from Rome. Rome was kind of the first civilization that got really rich and powerful and successful. You know, they weren't the first, I'm sure. Egypt and others had some of this. But the Romans did it on a scale that basically nobody ever had before. And that's why, in a very meaningful success, the Roman Empire has kind of never ended. Or the Roman Republic, if you prefer, has kind of never ended. The Christian tradition throughout medieval Europe was heavily influenced by Roman thought about the aggregation of wealth and power into a handful of influential small group, where, you know, the whole oligarchical idea and the concept of we are the bastion of civilization against the marauding hordes of people, including our own poor, who are these savage hordes of monstrous subhumans who we have to defend our civilized institutions against. There's some truth to all that. That's why I originally brought this subject up, even though I'm going to have to wrap it up without really getting into it. There is some truth to the idea that aggregating wealth creates a stability which is good for keeping large numbers of people alive. That's kind of the good principle behind things like Reaganomics is, if the rich get extremely rich, then the poor will get richer, even if they're still not rich. And there is some truth to that. I don't think it's enough to justify the policies set into place based on that ideology, but you can sort of see where they're coming from. There is a kind of logic to it. So the Romans kind of started off that whole ideal of aggregating wealth and power in the hands of the rulers of civilization is going to be good for all of civilization. And then they took that idea and ran off a cliff with it and had super corrupt rulers who ran the empire into the ground until it was conquered by barbarians. But what was left of that empire got turned into the medieval Christian church, which for a while literally called itself the Holy Roman Empire, even though it was a fragment of Rome's original size. And the Eastern Orthodox tradition kept some of that alive, and the Western Catholic tradition kept some other parts of it alive. And eventually it became America, and America was founded on kind of Catholic ideals and Protestant ideals, which were a reformed version of Catholic. And a lot of that ideology, the Quakers, you know, the various, I've often said the founders of America were crazy religious fanatics who were thrown out of England because they were telling everybody to stop having fun. All of those people carried some degree of Roman ideology and put it into practice in creating their new colony states. New England in particular was heavily based on the idea that you could carry forward the Christian goal of creating a kingdom of God on earth, and, you know, legitimately legitimately believed in a lot of things like education and medicine that are actively good for society, but they also married it with a lot of other highly questionable ideology. And so all of that stuff came down to us to a certain extent from Rome through Christianity and into America. And so now today, and of course America colonized the world and exported its version of democracy, so now the European Union and Australia and even what's left of Russia and portions of Africa, portions of the Middle East, India, China, all of the segments of the world are influenced to greater and lesser degrees by the American ideal, which was proven incredibly successful as a result of the things that we did in order to outcompete the Soviet Union and become a global economic superpower. So that was founded in Roman ideology. That was the idea of whatever we have to do in order to get richer. Once we get rich, we can use our wealth to build civilization, and civilization will promote good ideals. And so even if we have to murder 1 million poor people in order to get wealthier, we will then use our wealth to uplift millions more poor people out of poverty, or at least into a more tolerable, higher degree of a less miserable form of poverty. And that's how we're going to balance the karmic scales in our favor. Even though we're committing atrocities, we're also doing vast charitable and philanthropic work. And so the idea is it's all going to even out in the end. And then they're not super careful about their accounting, so whether that's actually true is highly questionable. I think we could really use some auditors on our planetary karmic scale to see whether the amount of economic imperialism that America did in order to build its wealth actually is outweighed by the amount of technological progress and social reform and so forth that has been powered by the American economic engine. That's a really interesting question that would be great to investigate, but you would probably want to actually know what the hell you're talking about, and I clearly don't, and this is already a super long video, so goodbye.